This is the End Zone. Let's move the chains and get into our 2020 preview of the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. In the past 4 seasons, Brian Kelly has won 10 or more games 3 times, posting a 92-37 record in 11 years as a head coach for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. In 2019, Notre Dame came up short versus Georgia and failed to show up in a rainy night game versus Michigan. But they didn't let that define their season. They ultimately finished at 11-2 after totally dismantling Brock Purdy and the Iowa State Cyclones in the postseason play. In 2020, the Irish will return with a well-seasoned quarterback in Ian Book, but there's a lot of talent around him that has moved on to the NFL, including one of the nation's top tight ends, Cole Kmet, and Canadian wide receiver Chase Claypool. 2019's leading rusher Tony Jones Jr. also departed for the NFL draft, leaving Notre Dame with some options at the running back position. The defense also loses stars like Khalid Kareem, Julian Okwara, Alohi Gilman, Troy Pride, and Jalen Elliott. But Clark Lee has stars in the making who are ready to step up. To me, the biggest key for Notre Dame's offseason was the actual COVID-19 schedule change. The Irish went from having one of the hardest, most well-traveled schedules in the country to moving into lackluster ACC led by the Clemson Tigers. Now Notre Dame avoids traveling from coast to coast to Ireland, and plus they lose a defensive Wisconsin and dangerous USC with Keaton Slovis. The new ACC schedule is much easier and gives Notre Dame a huge luxury of less air travel, which has been a problem for Notre Dame in the past, playing in places like California, whether it be USC or Stanford, respectively. Let's take a look and dive into this Notre Dame offense, which is led by college football's grandpa, Ian Book. It feels like Ian Book has been the head signal caller forever in South Bend, Indiana, and while his career has been impressive, 2020 is the year we all expect him to take another step and kind of jump off, if you will. He threw for 3,000 yards last year with 34 touchdowns and only 6 interceptions. His efficiency is outrageous. Book is certainly a guy who coaches can trust to get it done. Although Notre Dame doesn't see much returning production at the wide receiver position, Kevin Austin, Lawrence Keys, and speedster Braden Lindsey have the talent and even the upside to have a more productive year with new offensive coordinator Tommy Rees. Rees also has the advantage of a veteran quarterback and possibly one of the best offensive lines in all of college football, which brings me to the next position, running backs. While the feature back job might be up in the air, the Irish have the advantage of 6 returning offensive linemen, which has 3 returning seniors. Now, we could see Jafar Armstrong, Jameer Smith, or the physically gifted Sebo Flemister. Unfortunately, Trevor Spates is out for the season, but this running back position, as I said, is totally up in the air. Last year, the Irish finished 13th in total scoring offense. Their red zone offense was one of the best in the country, and we will see if they can improve kind of as a whole unit to make some more noise this year in the ACC. Now we can shift to the defense, which is the focal point of this Notre Dame team. Notre Dame is led by all-star safety Kyle Hamilton. Hamilton had 25 solo tackles and 4 interceptions and will once again be this defense's anchor. Last year, Notre Dame was the 3rd best passing defense in all of college football, and Hamilton actually had a huge part in that. The defensive line reloads with Adi Ugandehi and Tua's cousin, Myron Tungavaloa Amosa. The linebackers on this roster are nasty, with Jeremiah Owusu-Karamoah returns with 5.5 sacks and 13.5 tackles for loss, while Drew White finished with 48 tackles last season, second on the team, behind Jeremiah Owusu-Karamoah. The Irish also landed Nick McLeod in the offseason, a corner from NC State who should come in and plug in some holes nicely. Now let's take a look at the 2020 Notre Dame football schedule. Please note that the Irish were to host Western Michigan, but the MAC has canceled their season, so I doubt that game is going to be played, but if they are playing, I'm going to go ahead and say that they win against Western Michigan. The season opens with the Duke Blue Devils, which is an easy win for the Irish in their season opener at home. Then Notre Dame travels to Wake Forest. The Demon Deacons lost their best player in Jamie Newman in the offseason and don't match up well necessarily against the Irish. Notre Dame gets the win against Wake Forest. After Wake, Notre Dame goes back home to host Mike Norvell's Florida State Seminoles team. It's just too early for a program like Florida State, who's in a total rebuilding mode, to knock off the Irish, especially after Notre Dame in a bye week. So Notre Dame gets the win hosting Florida State. Now here's a 2-game stretch where things can definitely get interesting. I think that Notre Dame could possibly see some scares. Notre Dame hosts a very dangerous Louisville Cardinals team. The Cardinals are a fun, fast team, but they are incredibly undersized both on defense and on offense. They can make this game close going to half, but I think that Notre Dame will run away with it. Don't be surprised though if we possibly see a scare. Then Notre Dame goes to Pittsburgh. Not only has Pitt been known to play spoiler in the past to teams like Clemson, but they have also been a thorn in Notre Dame's side in recent memory. We should see a better team this year from the Panthers, and while we might have 2 scares happen in this span, I think that Notre Dame comes out with wins. Then Notre Dame plays at Bobby Dodd against a Georgia Tech team that is in total renovation as a program. This will be a blowout. And then on Saturday, October 7th, the game we will all have been waiting for, Clemson comes to town with college football's prodigal son, Trevor Lawrence. And yes, Notre Dame fans, they are too much to handle. Part of Notre Dame's problem in big games has been the lack of offensive production. In fact, we saw that last time when Notre Dame played Clemson. Their defense was able to hang in there, but the offense just didn't show up. They cannot depend on their defense to beat a team of Clemson's caliber, and this year they just don't have the offense to win unless Tommy Rees turns this offense into something we haven't seen Notre Dame in a very long time. Coming off the loss, Notre Dame gets a nice win versus Boston College, which could actually be a fun game because former Notre Dame quarterback Phil Jurkovec could be fighting for that starting role with the Eagles. Then Notre Dame gets a much-needed bye week before playing the second-best team on their schedule, North Carolina, an important bye week. This one's hard for me because I really like what Mac Brown is doing and building in Chapel Hill, but Notre Dame at this point where they are, they just have more talent, and I think that they handled the Tar Heels well. The Irish defense is suffocating, and their offense is going to be able to put up points on North Carolina. Remember, this North Carolina team, they let up 38 touchdowns on defense last year. They weren't able to finish within the top 43 in any of the main defensive categories. They really need to see improvement. I just don't see Notre Dame losing to Clemson and North Carolina in the same year. Finally, the season ends with a win over Syracuse and a berth to their first and probably only ACC championship, which I think will be played against Clemson. Overall, this is an extremely solid and sound college football team. The main worries are at the skill positions on offense. This defense should return with full stride and possibly see improvement with guys like Kyle Hamilton being in year 2. I would love to know your thoughts and record predictions for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I have the Irish at 9-1 with a berth to the ACC championship. Thanks for watching the EndZone. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment as always so we can move the chains.